Welcome to Scribe Studio. My name is Mark Walker, and today I'm joined by Pierre Hulsebus. Hello, Pierre.
Hey, Mark. How's it going?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Super.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us today. Pierre is one of the pre-sales engineers at Scribe, and he has contact with a lot of our larger customers and our larger resellers that work with some of our with larger data sets. And one of the things that's really important to them is performance. So Pierre's prepared some material today, and he's ready to talk to us about things that you can do with your Scribe Insight design to optimize performance when you're working with dynamic CRM as a target. So Pierre, before we get into that, could you educate us a little bit about what kind of situations do you see these large data sets?
So typically our customers, we've got a couple different customer types where we're seeing this happen. So one of them would be in an area like financial services would be a type of customer where they have a very large customer base inside a CRM. Let's say like 1 million customer records in there, or 1 million something, right, inside of their CRM system. And from there, what has to happen is maybe they have a daily process that has to go and update the balances on all of those records. So they have some sort of line of business application that captures transactions, maybe like in financial services, portfolios and all the balances of all your portfolio records. And at the end of the day, they just want to be able to update all the records in CRM with all those new portfolio balances. So that's a large, data set. It has to happen in a very small window of time. So that's one area that we see, is in a kind of non-transactional, but kind of the traditional batch process stuff.
Right.
The other area that you would see this is in things that are like data migration projects, where somebody is coming from a legacy system and they want to migrate over to dynamic CRM or just another application, and they need to do that in a short window of time, a few days or over a weekend or something on that order, where you're kind of shutting the old system off on Friday and hoping on Monday to have all the data migrated and everything, so that you've just got just those 2 days to migrate millions of records. And so there's a lot of the need for speed in those types of scenarios.
I've seen some situations where there were customers that had large data sets because there wasn't a way for them to capture the net change that was happening in the source. There was no way from whatever that source system was of telling us, just give us the information that's changed since the last time we were in this process. So you were in effect getting everything every time, and that's one that I've seen happen a few times.
Yeah, that's another one, right, where the source ERP application does its. We see that like in the education space, where they have certain legacy applications that keep track of all the transactions for all of the students. So they have a very large student body and all the transactions that happen on a daily basis for the students. But like you said, even though they know only a small subset of that data changes every day, there's just no way to detect the change in the source. And so you have this big data set, and you basically have to replicate that entire data set of the 1 million student records and all of the transactional records in there every day to keep the CRM system up to date. And it's in those ways where you kind of want to use the brute force of the servers and split the jobs up and do all of this to get there. And we have some tricks on that, but you still have you can kind of run into the wall, so to speak, because the application itself still runs on a database in the back end, right? The CRM application still is a database application, so it has its own constraints too. So sometimes we can get in that scenario where we can have so much data that the application can't even keep up with the amount of data that it has. So we've got a couple different tricks we've learned now, and we've added those to our to the application.
Right. So I know that you've prepared and selected a couple of those tips that you want to teach us about. So why don't you take us in there and show us what we can do on the configuration side of these DTS files to optimize performance?
Sure. So the first one, I just kind of want to establish a little bit of a baseline, and so I'm gonna click this start button here, and then I'll talk about what's going on here in the background. So we're connecting from a SQL database that's running local here on my laptop to Dynamics CRM Online. And we're doing a traditional integration pattern that everybody that's used our tool for years would be doing, which is the source data has an account number in it, customer number 123, and that goes into a customer number field in CRM. And during the insert of that operation, it creates a new record. And then later on, when we come back and do an update, we have to have what we call a lookup link for that, right? So you've got to look up based on this account number into CRM, and this is how the update insert operation functions. It looks at this key field that you're sending over from your source database to match it up with a field in CRM, and it's returning back to, down at the programming level, returning back the record ID, this account ID, which is what it's called in CRM. It's the GUID, this unique identifier for that record. And so then Scribe knows, okay, I've got now an ID, and now I can issue a update this record operation. So that's how the Scribe update process works to do updates or inserts. And so if it finds no data through the result of that query, then it says, oh, I need to do an insert. So that's how Scribe knows whether to do an update or an insert. It's all based on the logic of this unique identifier.
Mm-hmm.
So this came back with, let's say, how many seconds is that? That's a minute and 17 seconds. I built a little spreadsheet. I'm going to just try to keep track of this. So that was a minute and 17 seconds.
That's 77 seconds.
So 77 seconds. So we got about 2.5 rows per second is what we got.
Okay. So what is the target that you're working with? We've already talked about dynamic CRM, but is this CRM online or is this a CRM that's deployed on premise?
Yeah, good question. It's a dynamic CRM online. I think that's a good. The one of the challenges with these types of kind of horse racing exercises, if you will, there's a lot of variables in this connection, right? There's the latency across the network, there's a server, the SQL size and whatnot. So all these numbers are always going to be relative. So if I did the same horse race and I was sitting in a really fast data center with super fast networks and the back end was highly optimized, I would have different results. So a lot of this is always going to be relative. So that's something always to think about when you look at these numbers, that this is just relative for me today. If I ran this a little later today, based on the bandwidth and latency I have in my network, it might be different.
Okay.
So those numbers may be different.
All right.
So this is our kind of, as we were saying, our typical design pattern that we've had for quite some time. So a couple things that Scribe has added. We added this summer to our system was this concept, a couple different little features that we added. So I want to look at the effect of those features. So I'm going to go right into where those settings are for those features. If you go into the connections and adapter settings, there's some new options here. So I'm going to talk about these different options. One of the first ones is this concept of, we'll just kind of go from the bottom up. First is what we refer to as a pre-seek operation. So the pre-seek, so Scribe in the background, when it does a insert or update of a record, one of the features that Scribe has always had is been this what we call a target variable. And that allows you to do is take data from one step and use it in another step. So let's say, for example, when I insert an account record and it does this insert or update, let's say I want to, in another step, update a contact record and parent the contact record to the customer that I just created or updated, I can carry that account ID or the phone number down into those subsequent steps. And that's a great feature. But it comes with a cost. There's a cost in the background of the SQL seek to get all that data, send it over to Scribe, have Scribe, kind of munge through all that data and put it in the appropriate target variable. And if you're not using that target variable in your system or in your job, it would be worth it to be able just to turn that off. And so that's one of the things that we've added is this ability to turn the pre-seek off. So if you check this box, it's going to skip that pre-seek operation, and it's going to eliminate a big SQL job on the back end that has to happen to go find all of this variable data and bring it back into Scribe.
So what you're doing with that one is that you're trading off some features like you were talking about with target variables that you might not need for lessening the number of, seeks that have to be done against the database, cutting down the amount of traffic that's going to happen for every record that we're processing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's one feature that we've added here recently. This little checkbox here, use the Dynamics CRM Bulk API. Mm-hmm. This is Scribe's way that we support Microsoft's Bulk API. So Microsoft, back in, I think it was January of this last year, they added this into their API, what they call the Bulk API. And what that allows us to do is send a single command, if you will, to say insert record. But instead of just giving it one record, we can give it 200 records at a time. And it will then uptake all 200 records and do the insert operation or do the update operation all at one shot. And so it kind of, because we don't have to negotiate a connection for each one of those 200 records and get an acknowledgement back all separately, we kind of compress that job, so to speak, down. And so it's not necessarily more efficient on the on the CRM side. It just lowers the overhead in terms of the connection back and forth between the target and the source. And so that lowers, the combination of those two can lower the efficiency, or improve the efficiency, and just kind of lower the whole kind of transaction.
So it sounds like the way that feature works with this bulk capability API is that you can group up or batch up a bunch of records that you want to do something with in Dynamics CRM and hand it off to them as a big bunch, and therefore you're reducing the amount of traffic that's going back and forth. So you're not doing a single transaction to get these 200 rows in. You're doing one big transaction, and it gets sort of unpacked on the server side. Then you get all your responses back when it's finished processing them.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Okay. Very good. Very well spoken. Very well done.
Well, I'm sure you would have corrected me if I didn't do it right. But
that's perfect. That's exactly what happens, right? And it's kind of, instead of doing 200 individual transactions, it's one transaction with 200 accounts in it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I know there's another feature that's on that window that you're going to talk about.
There is another feature right here, and this is called, Scribe calls this fast load. This is our bulk processing model that Scribe's had actually since December of last year, and this predated the Microsoft CRM Bulk API.
Okay.
And what this allows us to do is we can simultaneously spawn up multiple connections into the Dynamics CRM API through one workbench. So one workbench file here that we're working with can actually spawn up to 64 simultaneous connections into CRM. And so it's going to be difficult to see the effect of that in our small data set that I have here.
Right.
Because, I just don't have that much data. I mean, we only have 190 records, but you would see this if you were doing these kind of, 10,000 record jobs, you would see the effect of it in that. But you can, so you can turn this up and down. And again, this is, if you're familiar with our Scribe has multi-threading on the server also. So this is something in our server environment we've had for kind of this similar concept to this for many years, actually. And so, again, this is one of those areas where to get a good baseline and to really understand the benefit of this, it takes a little bit of testing and tweaking to find that kind of optimal range. If I have too many threads, then I take up a lot of resources, then the machine slows down. Right. It's that kind of fine balance between machine resources and the application. So This lets you kind of push it all the way up to the top and go full, put the pedal to the metal, so to speak.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned the server optimization that we have for running multiple processes simultaneously. And for people that are experienced with Insight, you probably know that we advocate for trying to use that by using message queues, right? So sometimes we have these integration patterns that we try to help people with or teach them, where you take the data from your source and you load it up into a message queue so that you can use that multi-processing power of the Scribe server. But that really only comes into play when you're working with messages coming out of a queue, except now that we're working with dynamic CRM, as you're showing us in this example, that you can actually kind of get that multi-threading going on without going through that whole integration pattern to involve message queues, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So I'm just gonna run this. Just click this run here and see how our performance is with this. Again, now we haven't made any substantial changes to the mappings at all. Nothing's changed in the source or target application. All the mappings and what's going on at this level is still the same. It's just taking advantage of some of these other bulk processing functions now, turning off the pre-seek. So this will improve the performance a little bit and give us a little enhancement, a little boost without really making any substantial changes. I should also mention because when you turn this pre-seek function, click that little button, what's going to happen, of course, is you're going to lose potentially a function. So by default, that is turned off. So the pre-seek operation by default is turned off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's nearly done here. So it's about the same. It says the last one we had was done in 77 seconds. Isn't that what we said?
Yep, that's what I remember.
70 seconds. So this is done in 70 seconds. So we got a little improvement. This was in 70 seconds. And again, we're working with a small data set. Typical improvement for those two things should be about 10 or 15% would be about what you would expect to see improvement just by turning those two on, those functions on right there. The biggest one really comes from the pre-seek, I think. That's just my opinion. Right.
Now, are there any other features that you haven't shown us yet that you want to go over?
I do. I have.
You have one more up your sleeve, is that right?
Absolutely. So this is the big one. Scribe has been listening to customers for quite some time on this and really trying to see what we can come up with. And so we introduced a brand new function that came out in July of this year, and we call this upsert. Now, upsert is different than insert. You've got your insert and update and insert. Now you have this new function called upsert. Now, upsert, when I first click this, one of the things it lets me turn on is the bulk mode. So I can use this bulk mode. So this now is like a select from the source in a larger data set. So it pulls back a larger data set to start with, so it's efficient over on that part. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that it does. But more importantly, what it does is it changes the dynamic relative to this account ID. So in our update insert operation, remember I had to provide a lookup link for it to go and find the customer ID number in CRM and then return the account ID so we knew whether to update or insert. Mm-hmm. So Scribe for a long time has actually had a function. A lot of folks use this in their ERP integrations called key cross-reference two-way. So what you can do is what you need to provide now in your query, if you can somehow get the GUID or the unique identifier, the account ID record in this case, as part of my query, upsert, when I map that GUID into the account ID field, that's the primary key in CRM. So the logic that Scribe uses to determine whether it needs to insert a new record or update a record is now going to be based on the SQL source, as opposed to going and fetching something through a web service across the network, going and then looking at SQL, scanning through a million records,
Right.
finding nothing, and going, okay, I need to do an insert. So we can eliminate that whole round trip and that whole transaction by using upsert. And so the trick is to you can then now eliminate the lookup there, and all I need to do though is I need to modify, my query in some way or come up with a lookup operation. There's many different ways to get that account ID, but you can use this one feature. Scribe has had this for quite some time, as we're saying. I like this. I've always liked this function, this key cross-reference two-way function that keeps a copy in the Scribe internal database of that cross-reference between the ERP ID number and the dynamic CRM account ID number. And because that now sits locally in SQL, it's really, really fast. It's really fast. So this is kind of cool. I can turn all those other functions on, so I can now still take advantage of all the other functions that we had. I can use the bulk API, and I can skip that pre-seek. I can use upsert instead of update, and I can also use this bulk operation now. So I got everything turned on. I've got the nitrous, and I've got I've got the big wheels on the back, and we are ready to go here.
All right.
Let's
see it go.
Same test, same data, just adding that this upsert operation.
One thing to point out, which you already did, but I just would like to emphasize, is that with the upsert, you do need to provide that primary ID value for whatever object, or you want to call it entity, that you're working with in Dynamic CRM, right?
Yep, that's the big trick.
So that's what's this last one here that you showed. This is the one where you might have to do a little modification to your integration design in order to get that data included. In your case, you were getting out of the key cross reference. In another situation, maybe that's something you load into your source or make that part of your integration to put it into your source data originally, so you're not joining it in from this key cross reference table. But either way, you do have to provide that GUID value in order for this upsert operation to work.
Absolutely true.
Right.
So this finished in 18 seconds.
All right.
So in that one, we got a 328% improvement. So we went from 2 rows a second to 10 rows a second, over just a little under 11 rows a second.
Something I was just thinking of, Pierre, was that you and I are having a Skype call over the same internet that you're using to connect with Dynamic CRM. So that might have a little bit of an impact on your
that may have
your throughput.
A little bit of bandwidth issue on that, but that's that's a really good example though. This 300% improvement in speed between kind of where we would have been, in June and today. Now, so just by a couple tweaks, we've been able to, triple the improvement of the speed, from a little over a minute down to 20 seconds.
That's great.
And that's just with a very small data set. Typically, the larger data sets have the disparity is much larger actually in larger data sets because there's just more data to search on the CRM side. So, and there's other nuances in this, whether you're using standard objects inside a CRM or custom entities inside a CRM. There's different performance issues around that even.
I don't recall if we talked about it already, but if you're working with Dynamic CRM like you are in these examples, it's really important to do as much as you can on your side that you can do with your DTS design and these features you've shown us on how you can use those optimizations, because unlike when you're working with CRM that's on-premise, you don't have the option of doing any tweaking to the way that SQL Server database is configured and setting up indexes, right?
Right. So, that's absolutely true. So, as you were saying early on, a lot of our customers that I'm working with projects, the CRM is on-premise.
Right.
And so there are tricks. Microsoft has provided some great helper white papers on how to improve the SQL performance of CRM on the back end, adding indexes. For example, and this is a really good example, we were using a lookup link that was based around a non-indexed field in SQL. That customer ID number, the ERP ID number is just a field. There's no there's no index on that inherently in dynamic CRM.
Right.
So just by making that unique and making that a clustered index, or even making it a non-clustered index in SQL, and that's all supportable. It doesn't break any rules for Microsoft at
Right.
all to do that. And they actually give you some good examples in those white papers.
All
So
right.
we.
So do you?
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask if you had any other tricks up your sleeve, or is that it?
Well, there are other tricks, but what we have is we're going to spend some time in our inside track videos going into some of the nuances around the how to incorporate some of this key cross-reference data into the source queries, because that kind of gets a little bit into a lot more SQL details and things in that order. For
Right.
today, it's a little too much. So we'll
Great.
have a little more detail in that, and we'll talk about some more performance stuff.
All right. Well, Pierre, thank you very much for taking the time to prepare this information. I think it's really helpful and should help people out in optimizing performance around working with Dynamics CRM. So if people wanted to follow you, Pierre, and learn more about you, how would they do that?
Sure. A couple different ways. We're going to be at the CRM Extreme and at the CRM user group meetings this fall.
Okay.
And so you can come and stop by the Scribe booth. We also be doing some sessions at both of those. So there'll be some opportunities to kind of sit with us and learn more about integrations and what we know about integrations. You can also follow me on Twitter, and that's InfuseMe at Twitter, and also Scribe Nerd. We're part of the nerd herd. So
Nerd, right. Scribe Nerd is a Twitter account that some of the technical people at Scribe watch over, and we just try to provide links and information to technical topics about things that are going on with our company and our product. And you can follow me, Mark Walker, at Mark at Scribe.